I'm only writing this down because the police told me that keeping a record might help me process what happened, though I don't think anything ever will. I haven't told my family the full details because I don't want them to look at me with that same pitying expression the lead detective had. If you're hearing this, just know that I'm not looking for sympathy. I just need someone else to know the truth about what was happening in that house while I thought I was alone. It started out as a favor for a guy named Miller who lived 3 doors down from my new apartment. I had only been in the neighborhood a few months, settling into the quiet rhythms of working from home as a freelance data analyst. Maybe that's why I was the most logical choice, the one person around who could keep an eye on his place while he handled a family emergency upstate. He seemed like a decent man, quiet, steady, the kind who kept his lawn trimmed just so and never let a single note of loud music spill into the street. So I didn't think twice when he offered me $200 just to feed his cat and bring in the mail. Simple. Ordinary. And then he set me up on his Ring camera account so I could check for packages or see whether the stray dogs in the neighborhood were tearing up his trash. Just that. Just that. The first 2 days were completely uneventful and honestly a bit boring. I'd walk over around 10 in the morning, give the cat some fresh water, and check the perimeter of the house before heading back to my own place to start my shift. Miller's house was one of those older suburban builds, with a heavy oak front door and a long, narrow hallway that led straight back to the kitchen. It always felt a little colder inside than it did outside, but I just chalked that up to the central air being set low to save money while he was gone. I remember thinking the house felt incredibly still, almost like it was holding its breath. But at the time, I just thought it was because I wasn't used to the silence of a house without a TV running in the background. On the 3rd night, I was sitting on my couch around midnight, finishing up a report when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a notification from the Ring app saying there was motion at Miller's front door, which struck me as strange, quiet as the street always was at that hour. I tapped the notification and waited as the grainy, blue-tinted live feed buffered on my screen. The wide-angle lens showed the porch washed in the sickly yellow glow of the street lamp, still and silent, but no one was there. I watched for about 30 seconds, nothing moving except a moth drifting near the sensor, and I figured it had to be a glitch, or maybe just a stray cat tripping the infrared. I was about to set my phone back down when the motion alert triggered a second time, barely a minute later. This time, when the feed popped up, there was a man standing directly in front of the camera lens. He was so close that his face was slightly distorted by the fisheye effect, making his features look elongated and unnatural. He wasn't wearing a mask or a hood, just a plain gray sweatshirt, and he was staring straight into the camera with an expression that I can only describe as completely blank. He didn't try the doorknob, he didn't look at the windows, and he didn't move a single muscle for the entire 10-minute duration of the recording. I felt a wave of unease as I watched the timer on the app count upward while he simply stood there perfectly still. I waited for him to move or say something, but he remained like a statue with his eyes fixed on the camera lens. I remember checking my own front door locks multiple times that night, worried that I might see someone standing on my lawn if I looked outside. I did not get much rest. And when I finally did, I kept thinking about that gray sweatshirt and those staring eyes watching from the shadows. The next morning, I was hesitant to go back over to Miller's, but I knew the cat needed to be fed. I walked over with my pepper spray in my hand, feeling like a paranoid idiot as I scanned the bushes and the neighbor's driveway. The porch was empty, and there were no scuff marks or signs of a struggle near the door. When I entered the house, everything looked exactly as I had left it, but the air felt heavier, almost humid. I went through my usual routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from the shadows of the hallway. I checked the ring history on my phone to show the police, but the clip from 3:14 a.m. was gone, replaced by a message saying the footage failed to upload to the cloud. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing, or that it was some kind of elaborate prank by the neighborhood kids. I told myself that digital files get corrupted all the time, and that a guy standing on a porch isn't a crime, even if it is incredibly creepy. I even called Miller to ask if he was expecting any visitors, or if he had any weird neighbors I should know about. He sounded distracted and told me he didn't know anyone in the area who would be out at that time of night. He thanked me again for watching the place and hung up, leaving me alone in my apartment with a growing sense of unease that I couldn't quite name. That evening, I decided I would not look at the app anymore, so I turned off the notifications and tried to distract myself with a movie, but my eyes kept drifting back to the phone. The silence of my apartment felt heavy, and every little creak of the floorboards made me jump. I kept thinking about how the person in the video had not moved at all, which was the kind of stillness you only see when someone is waiting for something specific to happen. By the time 3 in the morning rolled around, I was sitting upright in bed with my heart racing from the tension. Despite my best intentions, I picked up the phone at exactly 3:14 in the morning and opened the live feed. My breath hitched when I saw the person was back, standing in the exact same spot as the night before. They had not changed their clothes, and their gaze was still locked onto the camera lens with intense focus. This time, I noticed a dark mark on the collar of the sweatshirt that made my stomach churn as I realized this was not a prank or a glitch. This person was real, and they were coming to this house every single night for a reason I did not want to understand. I called the local authorities, but they explained there was not much they could do since no specific crime was being committed. They promised to send a patrol car when one was available, but I felt that by the time they arrived, the person would be gone. I watched the screen for the full 10 minutes, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. When the feed finally cut out, I sat in the dark for hours, listening to the wind outside the window. I felt trapped in my own home by the knowledge of what was happening just a few doors away. The next day, I went to the house much earlier than usual, hoping to see if anyone was nearby during the day. I searched the backyard and checked the garage and even looked at the crawlspace access panel. Nothing seemed out of place, but the cat was acting strange, refusing to come out from under the sofa and hissing whenever I got close. I decided to do a more thorough sweep of the interior, checking the locks on all the windows and making sure the back door was bolted. As I walked down the long hallway toward the bedrooms, I noticed a small pile of dirt on the carpet, right in front of the utility closet. It was fresh, damp earth, which was strange because it had not rained in 3 days. I looked up at the ceiling thinking maybe there was a leak, but the plaster was dry and intact. I reached out to open the closet door, thinking maybe a pipe had burst inside, but I stopped when I felt a faint vibration coming through the wood. It was rhythmic and low, like a very slow breathing sound on the other side of the panel. I felt a chill as I realized that the sound was not coming from a machine or a pipe, but was coming from a person. I backed away slowly, with my eyes fixed on the door handle, praying that it would not turn. I moved without a sound, retreating toward the front door, my heart racing so fast I was sure anyone nearby could hear it. I didn't stop until I was back in my own place, the door locked and the chain engaged. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that maybe it was just the water heater or the ventilation system making noise, but the image of that dirt on the carpet kept flashing in my mind. Quiet, stubborn proof that someone had been moving through that house when I wasn't looking. I spent the next few hours in a state of total paralysis, unable to decide if I should call the authorities again or just wait for the homeowner to return. I felt like I was losing my focus, caught between the reality of what I had seen on the camera and the unsettling possibility of what was behind that door. I kept thinking about the person in the gray sweatshirt and how they never tried to get in. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them staring at me, their face pale in the light of the camera feed. And then, a startling thought drifted into my mind, slow and chilling, making me bolt upright as I reached for my phone. I opened the camera app and went into the settings to check the device sharing history that the homeowner had set up for me. I wanted to see if anyone else had access to the feed, thinking maybe it was a former roommate or a family member. As I scrolled through the list of authorized users, I saw the owner's name, my own name, and a third account that was simply labeled guest. I clicked on the guest account details, and a slow, uneasy chill curled through me as the page loaded. The email tied to it was nothing but a string of random characters. A jumble that meant absolutely nothing, yet the login history told a different story. It showed the account had been active every single night for the past week, always starting at 3:14 in the morning. I quickly grabbed my keys and headed back to the house, trying to reassure myself the guest account was harmless, but feeling uneasy as I reached the porch. Struggled to unlock the door with shaking hands and knew I needed to check the closet despite my growing sense of concern. When I finally got inside, the house felt different, like the temperature had dropped significantly in the few hours I had been gone. I did not turn on the lights, not wanting to announce my presence to whoever might be in the back rooms. I crept down the hallway with my back pressed against the wall, moving toward the utility closet where I had seen the dirt earlier. The house was completely quiet, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own shallow breathing. As I approached the closet, I saw that the pile of dirt had been smeared, as if someone had stepped in it and moved toward the kitchen. I reached the closet door and stood there for what felt like an hour, with my hand hovering over the handle. I could feel a faint warmth from the wood, and that same rhythmic heavy breathing was still coming from the other side. I took a deep breath, gripped the handle, and pulled the door open as hard as I could, prepared for anything. But the closet was empty, except for a few boxes of holiday decorations and a vacuum cleaner. I felt a brief wave of relief, followed immediately by an even deeper sense of unease. The breathing had not stopped. It had just shifted and now sounded like it was coming from beneath my feet. I knelt down on the floor and pulled back the corner of the rug that covered the closet floor, revealing a small square wooden hatch that I had not noticed before. It was an old crawlspace access used for plumbing repairs, and the wood around the edges was scuffed with fresh marks in the dust near the handle. I did not want to open it, but I knew I could not leave the house without knowing what was down there. I hooked my finger into the ring and pulled as the heavy wood creaked upward to reveal a dark, narrow hole leading into the foundations of the house. A smell hit me immediately, like damp earth and stale sweat, which made my eyes water. I pulled out my phone and switched on the flashlight, shining the beam down into the darkness. The light reflected off a pair of eyes about 6 feet below me, tucked into the corner of the concrete footings. I let out a startled cry and scrambled backward, hitting my head against the closet shelf. The person below did not move. They just sat there in a fetal position, with their face pale in the harsh light. It was the person from the camera feed, still wearing that same gray sweatshirt, looking up at me with that same blank, unblanking expression. I did not stay to see if he was going to climb out, as I bolted for the front door and ran out of the house and down the street toward my own place. I did not even look back until I was inside my living room with the door locked and a heavy piece of furniture pushed in front of it. My heart was racing, and I could not stop my hands from trembling as I called the authorities again to report that there was an intruder in the house nearby. I explained that I had seen him with my own eyes, and they told me an officer was already in the area and would be there in minutes. I watched from my window as 2 patrol cars pulled up to the house. their lights flickering across the darkened windows of the neighborhood. The officers moved toward the front door with smooth, practiced steps, their motions steady and sure. I waited, listening for any sound, any sign of life, but the house stayed silent. Minutes slipped by, 20 of them, before one officer finally stepped back out to the curb, lifting his radio to speak into it. I felt the suspense tighten around me, too much to bear, so I stepped out onto my porch, keeping my distance, but unable to stop myself from searching for any hint of what was happening. The officer, a middle-aged man with a tired face, walked over to me when he saw me standing there and asked if I was the one who called. When I nodded, he sighed and told me that they had searched the entire house, including the crawl space, and found it completely empty. I told him he was wrong, that I had seen the person sitting right there under the closet, but he just shook his head. He said they found signs that someone had been down there, including a sleeping bag and some empty water bottles, but whoever it was had vanished through a secondary exit point in the backyard. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality as I listened to him talk. I tried to explain about the camera app and the guest account, but the officer just looked at me with a mixture of boredom and suspicion. He said the homeowner had been contacted and claimed they did not know anything about a guest account, suggesting that maybe the system had been hacked. The officer told me to get some rest and to call them if I saw anything else, but his tone made it clear that he thought I was just overreacting to a shadow. He did not see those eyes, and he did not feel the warmth of the breathing through the closet door. After the police left, I went back inside and sat on the floor of my kitchen, too afraid to go near the windows. I felt a deep sense of unease, knowing that someone had been living beneath the floorboards of the house I had been in every day. I kept thinking about the guest account on the camera app and how it had been active every night at the same time. If the person was in the crawl space, why were they standing on the porch at 3:14 in the morning? The timeline did not make sense, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the person on the camera was not trying to get inside. They were already there, and they wanted me to know it. I spent the rest of the night staring at my phone, waiting for the notification I knew was coming. I had turned the alerts back on, unable to stop myself from watching the very thing that was filling me with so much unease. Time drifted on in the dark, quiet hours until at exactly 3:14 in the morning, the phone buzzed in my hand. I opened the app and held my breath as the live feed slowly came into view. The person in the gray sweatshirt was back on the porch, but this time, they weren't looking at the camera. They stood at the edge of the porch, gazing down the street toward my apartment building, still and silent, like a shadow deciding where to fall. Then, they raised a hand and pointed toward my window in a slow, deliberate motion that made my heart stop. I dropped the phone and crawled into the corner of the room, pulling a blanket over my head. I realized then that the person had not been watching that house at all, but had been using it as a vantage point to watch me. Every night they stood on that porch, they were not looking into the house, but were measuring the distance to my front door. The guest account was not a hack, but a setup. I remembered the homeowner's distracted voice on the phone and how quickly they had dismissed my concerns, and a new realization began to take hold. I did not actually know my neighbor at all. I just knew the version of him that mowed his lawn. I did not sleep for the rest of the night, and as soon as the sun came up, I started packing a bag. I did not care about my security deposit or my furniture because I just needed to get away from that street and those houses. I felt like I was being watched, as if there was a physical thread connecting me to that crawl space and the person who had been sitting in it. Every time I heard a car pass or a door slam, I jumped, convinced that the person in the gray sweatshirt was coming toward me. I was halfway through packing my clothes when I heard a soft, rhythmic scratching sound coming from the wall behind my bed. It was the same sound I had heard in the other house, a dry scraping noise like fingernails on drywall. I froze, my heart hammering in my ears as I leaned closer to the wall to listen. The scratching stopped for a second, then started again, moving slowly from left to right along the baseboard. It was not coming from the neighbor's place, but was coming from inside the wall cavity of my own bedroom. I realized, with a jolt of terror, that these old buildings shared the same crawlspace system and utility tunnels as the houses on the block. The person had not just escaped the other house, but had followed the path underground. I did not even finish the bag I was packing, as I just grabbed my phone and my car keys and bolted out the front door, leaving everything I owned behind. I did not take the elevator, because the thought of being trapped in a small metal box made me uneasy, so I sprinted down the stairs, nearly losing my footing on the concrete steps. I did not stop running until I reached my car in the parking lot, and even then, I spent a solid 30 seconds frantically checking the back seat and the floorboards before I dared to sit down. I drove out of the lot quickly, and I did not slow down until I was 3 towns over, sitting in the bright, artificial light of a 24-hour diner. I sat in a corner booth with my back to the wall, watching the door every time someone walked in, feeling completely overwhelmed. I tried to call the neighbor one last time, needing to hear that this was all some strange mistake, but the call went straight to a disconnected number recording. That was the moment I realized I likely did not even know his real name, and the house was probably just a temporary location. I checked the camera app on my phone, my fingers trembling, but the account had been deleted and the device was offline. It was as if the last week of my life had been erased, leaving me with nothing but a lingering sense of unease. I never went back to that apartment, not even to get my laptop or my passport. I hired a specialized moving company to pack up my things while 2 off-duty officers stood guard, but even they did not find anyone in the walls or the crawl space. They found plenty of evidence that someone had been living in the utility gaps of the building, though, including food wrappers, a small pile of my own mail that had gone missing weeks ago, and a small hole in the drywall behind my bed. The authorities told me they were looking into it, but without a name or a clear face from the footage, the file eventually went cold. I live in a high-rise now on the 20th floor, with a steel door and 3 different types of locks that I check every night before I go to bed. I do not use smart home cameras anymore, and I have covered every vent and access point in my new place with heavy furniture or reinforced grating. I still have trouble sleeping, especially around 3 in the morning when the silence of the city starts to feel too much like the silence of that house. Sometimes, when I am walking through a crowded area, I will see someone in a gray sweatshirt from behind, and my heart will stop, but it is never him. Or at least, I tell myself it is never him, because the alternative is something I cannot live with. The most unsettling part is not what happened before, but a message I received a few months ago on my new phone, where an unknown sender shared a single image that appeared to show me asleep in my bed. And since then, I have struggled to rest and feel constantly on edge in my own home. I am finished talking about this now. I have said everything I can remember, and I need to go check the locks on the balcony door one more time before the sun goes down. Please, if you ever get a request to watch a house for a neighbor you barely know, just say no and keep your door locked. I am finished with the recording now, and I am going to turn off the lights and just sit here in the dark for a while. I find it is easier to see them coming if you do not let your eyes get used to the light. I hope this helps someone else avoid the mistake I made.